Hopefully you can hear me just fine. I am so excited that you are all here with me today through Sktchy. I'm really excited to be here doing this live stream with you all. One thing that's going to be a little bit different in this case, since block printing takes a little bit of time, we're not necessarily doing a tutorial, but we're going to be talking about a lot of the really cool kind of prompts that we're going to have throughout my class. I'm going to talk us through a little bit of those and share some of my background, not only with my experience with art and with block printing, but also my work as a wildlife educator and as a naturalist. And so that's kind of what we're going to talk about here today, as well as working out and testing out some of the prints or the actual blocks that we make during my class. So you get to kind of see some of those. And one of my very exciting things is we'll have a raffle as well. I'll get to announce that winner here in a little bit of someone that won there who had signed up for my class. But to kind of get started, my name is Sarah Lynn Bowser. I am a wildlife educator currently based in San Francisco, California. Before moving to San Francisco, I actually grew up on the East Coast. And so I was a naturalist there, and I went to school and I got my degree in forest resources, and I worked a lot in environmental education. And I've been teaching all about wildlife and our environment for the past, I think about 7 years, probably for the past 7 years. I've been teaching. I work with general audiences, but one of my favorite things about my job is that I have the opportunity to work with non-releasable wildlife or ambassador animals. And I work with those animals in order to help teach local communities about wildlife that live near them, and hopefully quell some common fears that we might have about some of these wildlife, and hopefully make everybody, if not more excited about the wildlife that live in your community and in your neighborhood, at least a little more tolerable. For example, if you come to one of my programs and we start talking about snakes, well, I would love for you to love snakes the same way I do. If you still leave and you're like, I still don't really like them, but I'm happy if they're kind of at a distance and they can stay that way, then that means that I've done my job. If you're able to tolerate just a little bit more the wildlife that are around you, and just we'll try to be a little bit better neighbors with them that way. And so I saw someone just now on the little chat section. I apologize if I look, because your chats are right here so I can kind of see you. Somebody asking if I have ever worked with John Muir Laws. I've never worked with John Muir Laws. However, one of my favorite quotes is actually by him, and it says that love is just sustained, compassionate attention. And that is one of the quotes that I really enjoy and really love, especially when thinking about working with wildlife, is that the way that we show love for them is that sustained, compassionate attention, whether it's toward wildlife or towards our environment and the things that we work in. So it's very funny. That is one of my kind of favorite quotes that we have there, especially from that particular person. But kind of continuing through, like I said, the majority of my actual work is what I am paid for predominantly, is to be an educator and a teacher. I am often called an education specialist. So it is my job to work with teaching. I'm a certified interpretive guide, all that fun stuff. And in addition to all of my work kind of on that end, I also really enjoy art. And I am not somebody who has ever gone to art school or gotten any kind of formal training whatsoever. It's been something that has usually been self-taught and been something that I've really enjoyed, whether it was growing up, drawing or painting, or now especially, carving and doing block printing, which I taught myself here as well. But it's something that I've always done to express myself, and it does tend to be about wildlife or animals. I am very interested in actually taking some of these other Sktchy courses to learn how to draw people. I cannot do that. But animals, we can do animals, so that can work that way. But that's usually what I do here. I love using art, and so especially as I've grown in my career, one thing that I found really interesting was that with a lot of media or art, we weren't always seeing a lot of United States kind of native wildlife. I often was seeing, beautiful animals, but they were always on the other side of the world. There are so many portraits and paintings and things out there, of maybe lions or of giraffes or of really charismatic kind of megafauna that exists on the other side of the world, but not so much about wildlife that we do have here. They might be smaller, they might not always be as cool to look at, or they might be animals that you didn't even know were here. And so that is what actually prompted me to start my own project that was actually called the Overlooked Opossum. And it's the Overlooked Opossum. The opossum is one of my absolute all-time favorite animals, and I'd be happy to go on a tangent about them here in a minute about why I think they're so wonderful and amazing. But the Overlooked Opossum is a project that I started partially as like a challenge to myself, but basically to create art that in my mind kind of showed love towards animals that I didn't get to see, or I at least wasn't finding in a lot of modern media and modern art that we're able to find. So smaller animals, I think I have some prints on different fungus that you don't usually get to see, and I'll show you here in a little bit, talking about some of the different species. And so a large part of that is also what my class is about. So while in the class we are learning about block printing and kind of what that process is like, during that same time I am also providing a lot of information and talking about a lot of the wildlife that we're using for our examples and using for our inspiration. So by signing up for my class, you are also signing up for unsolicited advice about snakes, hearing me discuss snake patterns relatively frequently, and talking about how cool I think that they are, talking about different birds, talking about reptiles. You get to hear, I think, a full tangent about hognose snake behavior and why I think it's super cool, because they're another one of my really favorite animals. So this class, by participating in it, hopefully you're able to have a lot of fun, one, carving and getting ready, being able to create some prints, and two, hearing a lot about native wildlife that people probably don't pay enough attention to, at least in my opinion, in the way that we see it portrayed in art. And so that's a little bit of background about myself, a little bit of background about the project that I started with the Overlooked Opossum. And a lot of my art is definitely kind of geared towards and inspired by animals that I work with directly. And actually one of my ever first prints that I made in any actual series in any real capacity was based on bark beetles. And the reason it was based on bark beetles is one of the first ever print series that I ever created. It's really what encouraged me to start the Overlooked Opossum, because I remember sharing it and people saying, people kind of being excited about it and getting to have art that reflected wildlife that they didn't get to see all the time. And bark beetles, for those of you who do not know, they are very small beetles that burrow on the underside of bark, hence the name. And depending on the genus that they're in, they are actually going to create different gallery patterns. And those gallery patterns can look like full fans, they look like X's, they look just like they're beautiful, beautiful patterns. And when in proper amounts, bark beetles are part of a healthy forest. Now, of course, they can always get out of hand and cause a lot of forest resource management issues along that lines. But to me, I always thought that bark beetles created these beautiful patterns and this beautiful art, and I wasn't seeing it kind of represented. So I created a piece that I wish I could see, and that was the first one I ever made. And that was a direct result. I used all of my notes from when I was in school, when I was in forestry school. And I actually, after that, contacted my professor, and I sent her a pack of prints as a thank you, since I used all of her notes and everything that I learned there to actually create these pieces. And funnily enough, studying these animals more and more and more to make sure that I'm accurate whenever I create some of these pieces helps me remember even more about them. And art has been a really great way for me to learn more about these animals and remind myself about them in case I forgot. So now my ability to identify bark beetle galleries is much more in tune, I feel like, than it was even when it was for a grade whenever I was in college. Even past a lot of the wildlife that I work with in college, I now, like I said, I do work with ambassador animals. I've worked with animals as small as little invertebrates, all the way up to various reptiles, lizards, turtles, snakes, down through mammals, raccoons, opossums, deer, and even to larger raptors like owls, hawks, eagles, and even up to alligators. I've also handled alligators as well for teaching purposes. So I've done a large variety of things. And so having those close experiences with these animals is a really great inspiration in a lot of the pieces that I create. And today we're going to do, again, because it is a little bit different than maybe some of the other Sktchy lives, since I can't exactly do a full tutorial live for you for a block print. They would have to be, several hours long, kind of that way. We are going to kind of go through some of my pieces, some of my sketches. You can actually see the difference between the blocks and the sketches, and how they ultimately kind of turn out that way. And we're going to get to look at some of the blocks that I do carve in our class, and some of the final prints and things like that. And then also we will do, using one of the smaller blocks that we do in the first class, we're going to talk about, and we will do some short kind of printing that way using just some stamp pads, which is super easy and very simple that way. And so that's what we're going to kind of do this way. And before we do that, the teacher and me will pause for a second. I know they're to kind of give an opportunity to see if there are any questions or anything kind of as we're going through. If you do have questions, please put them in the chat, and I will do my best to answer them as I see them. I am trying to kind of keep my eye on it that way. If you have questions about my career, any of the animals that I worked with, just let me know, and I would be happy to kind of discuss some of that here with you. And before we continue, I do want to make sure that I remind everybody that my class lessons are coming out on Monday, November 15th, so that's going to be next Monday, but you can go ahead and sign up now. And we actually have a discount code, BLOCKWILD, so BLOCKWILD, and that's going to get you 20% off in the Sktchy shop, and it expires tomorrow, which is Friday. So we do have that there. You can sign up for the class, and now we have this really cool discount code, which could hopefully be very helpful for some people as well if you want to be able to participate. And with that, what we are going to do, we are going to kind of switch our cameras. I do have another setup over here that we're going to get ready to switch to and go through it that way. All right. Here we go. So we're going to go ahead and switch. All right, so we are now over here, and you can kind of see I do have some blocks here in the corner. And so this is kind of one of a workspace or anything that we're going to get to look at here. So first, what I will do is I want to show you one of the very, very first things that I ever carved, and talk about kind of why I carved it. Before moving to California, I actually had a very sweet little stamp whenever I lived in Georgia that said that I could add to anything that I wanted, and it said made with love, or someone in Georgia loves you. And so whenever I moved, I wanted to have something else like that, and I couldn't find any. So that's actually part of the reason why I even started with lino prints or block prints. You can see this one is very, very beat up. But I have this one that it says with love from San Francisco, since that is where I moved, so now I can add it to a large amount of our stuff here. And so I add all of these onto thank you notes, onto anything that I send in the mail. If anybody ever orders a print from me or anything, they always get thank you notes. This is always included. But it's always kind of sweet to know that this is actually one of the very first blocks that I ever carved. And it was actually what kind of got me started in learning how to do this. And after that, I would still do other smaller ones. I think we have this one that is some birds that are flying, and so then when you use a stamp pad and you kind of tap over and over and over, it looks like they're flying through a distance. We have a pine cone that I still use on a lot of my packaging and other things that way. And we see a question of what are my blocks made of. So these ones are made of linoleum, and so I do go through a list of materials in my class, but I'll also show you now. They are made of things that look like this. So a lot of the ones that I use are going to be from Speedball. They're the Speedy Carve. And whenever, in my classes, I make sure to go through kind of a breakdown of the different ones. I have Speedy Carve. They have one that's Speedy Cut Easy. I don't like it as much, but all of mine are softer linoleum. You can also get a harder linoleum as well that I know a lot of other people use. And in addition to those, I also use, it looks like this. These are the Blick Ready Cut plates, and so you can get these as well, but they're all really, really flexible. And so these are a lot of the ones that I use. So you'll see the majority of my blocks are either one of these. They're either going to be pink or they're going to be gray and it gets carved in and it looks white. I predominantly use these blocks just because they're relatively easy for me, and with the amount and the size that I carve, they work really well because I like using them for a variety of things. And then I just saw somebody else asking, do you have to carve backwards to get an image? Yes, you do. You have to, if you look closely here, so let's see if it'll focus here. So you'll notice it is not because the camera flips it, or is it flipping it on? Let me see, is it flipping it? Is it correcting it? Okay, so you have to pretend that my camera is not flipped because it is flipping it on the computer. If you look at it in person, this is actually a mirrored image on the stamp. Whenever it pops up on camera, it's actually showing it correct. In real life, it's switched, it's actually flipped. And so whenever you are, especially when you're using words, you have to make sure that you're doing a mirrored image, otherwise it is not going to come out correctly. And so that is actually one of the reasons that whenever we go through in my class, you'll see we kind of talk about having our sketch and transferring it to the block. That's always really important, especially when you're using words, to make sure that you're actually getting it correct for when you print it and it comes out right. So you can kind of see this, but let's see if we can kind of prove, we'll show, and hopefully it'll show how they actually come out. Here's what we'll do. So since it is flipping it on me, you can notice here on the printmaking, this should come out backwards. So you'll be able to see on camera that my webcam here is flipping it, and that's going to make the process a little bit confusing in this case. So there's our proof right there. You can see how this is flipping it that way. So pretend this is backwards. So with that, we're going to try to go through a little bit of the prints that I actually make for our class. One of the very first ones, I was really excited about this first one, was making little blocks that look like this. I'll move these ones off to the side. So these are the blocks here that actually look like this. And the idea for these blocks, this is the one that we carve in class. This is the one that I make it an example. And these are actually intended to be a section of snake scales for a snake's pattern, to where you're able to, using your one block, repeat it over and over and kind of create something that ultimately might look like this. And it looks almost like a snake going through. In this instance, for this one, since it was a garter snake, I did kind of a gradient of color going down to be more gray, starting at black, going into different shades of gray. And so having it here so you actually see the full snake pattern of it repeating over and over and over again. And so this is actually the first lesson that we are doing. And so you'll get to learn more about this going through the class, talking through the process of looking. This is, of course, one of the classes where we're going to learn a lot about snakes that way. This is when we have a lot of snake talk. We see a lot of reference images that either I've taken or my partner's taken that way. Snakes that I've worked with in person, so I've been able to have really great reference images that way for their scales. You get to learn a lot about snakes then that way, and going through the process of how we kind of create our design and transfer our image over onto our block and then ultimately carve it to create something kind of like this. And in this case, I will go ahead and kind of show you how that kind of works. We're going to do kind of a very simple version. I will say this a million times over in my class, that use what you have. I'm somebody who, as an educator, I'll never be rich in my entire life, but that is okay. But that also means that when it comes to wanting to try new art projects, sometimes I usually have to use things that are already around the house versus buying something brand new. And so in the class, you'll kind of see some different printing options. But I'll kind of go over two right now. One option is to use just a regular stamp pad. It looks like this. Just regular ones that you can buy at the store. You can get ones in different colors. I like this particular brand because the colors come out really nice and vibrant. And so I like them that way. But you could use pretty much whatever stamp that you wanted to, or whatever stamp pad that you wanted to. That part doesn't really matter. This is one method that you can use to create a print. And the other method is using actual ink and a brayer. So we have ink like this one. It's block printing ink that you can buy. You can buy all different brands, water-based, oil-based. It's up to you. There's all different types that you can get. And then you use a little roller like this to lay it out and roll it onto your print or onto your block to create your print. And that's something that we talk a little bit more about and mixing colors and all kinds of stuff in the class itself. But for right now, for the sake of time and for the sake of, you know, making sure that we're able to actually get to see a variety of things, I'm just going to use this one right here. And I saw somebody asking kind of like what brands they are and where you can get them. This one is, I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce it. This one is just a VersaFine. They come in a variety of colors. I got them just at a local art store. You can get them online as well. They're just really popular. But again, even this brand, you know, you can use whatever stamp pad you want, and that's perfectly fine. So the way this kind of works, we'll do it with kind of our block here for our garter snake. One method that you can do with this, I do this sometimes for test printing and other things like that. Taking our stamp pad, looks like this. We have our block, looks like this. We're just gonna kind of tap it on to try to make sure that we get some distribution of ink so you can see it's being added there. Making sure we have ink all over. Now I will say one of the things about using stamp pads versus using a thicker ink, the other ink, for example, the block printing ink. This one that again is by Speedball. This is a Speedball block printing. It's water soluble. It's just black is what this one is. But you can also get them in tubes that look like this. So this is another way that it comes in. This one's white. I have another black one. Blick has their own brands as well that I bought some of theirs. But for right now, I tend to use a lot of Speedball's ink and kind of get basic colors that I mix my own. And we go into that in my class there as well. But one difference you're going to see when we print with this stamp pad, so you're just going to take it and just like you would like a regular stamp, and you're going to just press. And then you lift it up and you have your print. And you'll notice between the two, this was with a stamp pad, this one is using ink like this. You'll notice that, if we can have it lined up here, the one with the thicker ink does tend to come out a lot clearer. This ink also sometimes you have a chance for your stamp pad to move, so it can get a little funky sometimes, but sometimes they come out really clear. But for smaller things, like if I am ever adding things just to decorate envelopes, if I'm ever adding anything onto thank you notes or anything like that, I am just using stamp pads and some of the smaller blocks that I carve. I'm using these versus, you know, breaking out any of this and creating a larger mess kind of that way. I'll just use stamp pads just like this. And then someone's asking, do you use the stamps afterwards? I reuse these all the time. I use these over and over and over for a very, very large variety of things. Yeah, like I said, I use these for all different types of stuff. And even if it's something that I don't sell, if it's a print that's maybe out of edition or I've sold it through or something like that, I might still reuse the blocks in different ways and reuse them for different things. And I'll do that until they start to degrade anymore. You know, if I'm still able to print on them and they're coming out just fine, I might keep reusing. Like these have held up for a while, so I use them to decorate. One really cool thing about this is even if you're somebody who doesn't want to, you know, make full larger prints or anything like that, you can always make smaller ones like this and repeat the pattern. I've made gift wrapping paper that way out of old paper bags. Like I said, I decorate envelopes, create my own thank you notes, all things like that. Like the thank you notes that I usually tuck in with my orders actually look like this. And so it just says thanks, because he's a snake, so he has all the S's. And then like I said on the back, this is what the With Love from San Francisco comes out looking like. So you can just reuse them relatively often, and that's usually what I do, which is one reason that I like these is it's creating something that I can use over and over and over, and I'm able to replicate the exact same thing over and over. So in the first class, that is kind of what we go through, is creating a piece or print that ultimately looks like this. In the class specifically, we reference, this is a garter snake, we reference the California king snake, so that pattern's gonna look a little bit different, and they kind of come out looking like this. That's with our first lesson, talking about it that way. And then one of our lessons later, you ultimately get to see we make a print that looks like this and layering different colors and kind of like a jigsaw puzzle kind of situation. This is of a hognose snake, and again in the class that we'll get to see how we kind of were able to layer colors like this, get a print this way. We also create ones that can be really simple and more detailed, like our box turtle. This is for our second lesson that we get to do. It's creating a print that looks just like this. And then, if I can locate it, oh, maybe I don't know where they went. We have our third lesson, here it is, where we create, which you probably have seen if you follow Sktchy, this is one they've referenced a lot. Creating a print of a red-winged blackbird here is our third lesson. So everything that we do is all animal-based. A lot of reptiles, a lot of snakes, we have turtles, we have birds, which aren't too far of a shot away from reptiles either. And so you'll kind of be able to see that process of how we get from just a blank block to a sketch to ultimately to those prints. And we get to go through it together, which is really fun, as well as talking about a lot of our materials, the differences, how we print these things. We go more in depth with that. And again, how you can kind of use some materials that you might already have. For example, usually when you go to press with a block and paper, you'll use a baren, which you use to help kind of distribute pressure. I am somebody who, again, likes to use stuff that I already have, and in my case, I actually don't even use a baren. I could absolutely buy one, but I just use a coffee can lid that I have at my house. Other people use wooden spoons. There are ways that you can press these by hand without even needing a press or without even needing to buy anything else extra. But like wooden spoons, I use a coffee can lid. And I'm able to get my prints to come out relatively all right. And then a couple people asking, is it permanent ink? Could you use watercolor? It's gonna depend. My ink that I have here is water soluble, but I know you can also get like different oil-based inks, and depending, I know that there are other things that you can do, and I've seen other artists apply watercolor with it after. I'm just not 100% sure what ink they use. I would not do that with one of these because that might cause some issues with this particular ink. But I know there are other inks out there that will work better for, because I have seen other artists do that, and sometimes the results are really, really pretty. In my opinion, I've seen other people do them and they come out really great. So going through, what I want to do now is I kind of want to show you, like I said, throughout our process, we're going to get to see the full process, and in it, I show you kind of how we started the sketch and add some of those details, and I want to show you kind of what I mean when I say it looks, what that process might look like. So I'm going to show you some of the sketches to the block, and then ultimately what the print comes out looking like. And this is, can we see the lid? The lid of what? This lid? Are you referring to this lid? You can see the ink is on the inside. Looks like that. And so then when you're asking, I saw someone else ask about the tool that you use to carve the blocks. And again, it's something that you see in my class itself. You have a tool that looks like this. And there are all of these smaller little carving tools that come inside. And this is all kind of broken down. This piece is actually missing to be able to attach these. I have it on another one that is placed somewhere else in my house since we recently moved. Everything's kind of missing, but they look like this. And that's kind of how that works. You use these to carve. You always have to remember these are actually like little knives, to be very careful with them, because when they do slide into your finger, it does not feel very good. So make sure that you're being careful with these. You also use, they sometimes come, this particular spiegel attachment. This is kind of like an intro one. It does come with an X-Acto knife attachment, or you can use an X-Acto knife that you already have, which is what I usually do, but that's further broken down in my class. Are you talking about this lid? I think it's this one. If this is the lid, I'm trying to figure out answering some of these questions about some of those lids. All right. So now what we will do is I'm going to show you kind of the process of how some of these stamps kind of even come into existence that way. And so I will start with, we'll go backwards. So for example, this is one of my prints. This is one of the larger prints that I created. This is one of the first really large prints that I created, called Possum in a Poplar, with a little young opossum in a poplar tree with the leaves, and we have the flowers here. And so you can see these there. So we have this print here. This is actually the print that our raffle winner will be awarded. And I guess now is as good a time as any to actually announce our raffle winner. So let me find their name. I'm not sure if you're here on our stream today, but let me find this person's name. The raffle winner's name is Judy Russell. So Judy, if you're here today, congratulations! You actually won one of these prints that we have right here. And so you are our raffle winner. Oh, somebody's asking me what this is. This is a coffee can lid. That's what you're talking about. This is for Jittery Joe's Coffee in Athens, Georgia. Whenever I was younger, I was a barista there, so I have a ton of old coffee cans. This is not a stamp. This is just a coffee can lid, if that's what you're talking about. Other than that, there's nothing else here that I can figure out what you're referring to there. But anyways, we're going to move on to say congratulations to Judy. You are the winner of this print, the Possum in a Poplar print. So we'll be able to contact you that way. If you're not here today, we're very excited for you. So this print here ultimately comes out looking like this. And if I can find what it used to look like before. So this is one of those instances where I have kind of fine-tuned some of my process to where my sketches look different now than they did before. So since this is one of the first ones that I ever carved and ever did, it looks a little funky. For example, now my sketches look more like this, more detailed. That makes it ultimately easier on myself. But back when I first started doing some of these larger pieces, this is what the sketch looked like. This is what was transferred to the block, and then I added finer details on the block itself. So this was the sketch. And then ultimately the block, once it was carved, looks like this. So you can see how the images are different and how they are reflections of one another that way. And for those of you who are curious, you can always go to, it is the overlookedopossum.com, and that is where you can see all of the prints that I've done relatively so far that fit within these works. You can see older prints, even if they're not even for sale right now. It does have a link to my store for prints like this one, which is just through Etsy at the Overlooked Opossum. But all of the prints that I have, you can see pictures. And what's really cool, or what I try to make that website also, is whenever you go through with these prints, there are also informational paragraphs about the animals that they're based on. So you can learn about possums that way, or whenever there's other pieces you can learn. I did one during the Brood 10 emergence talking all about periodical cicadas. So you can learn about the wildlife that they're all based on at the same time. All right, so we have our print here. This is the block, so you can see how we kind of went from one to the other. And then this is kind of this sketch here and what that looks like. So you can see this comparison, how we went from this to this. Obviously, a lot of detail was added, and I will say in this particular instance of this block, I did not fully plan out a lot of the fur pattern. I do not recommend that to others. That was very stressful. Don't do that to yourself. So try to plan out as much as you can in your sketch now. It's one of those things that's been a learning curve for me. That's changed as I've continued carving. And I'll show you kind of some of my other larger pieces as we've kind of gone through. One of the more recent ones was this sketch that looks like this one. This one was one that I was really excited to do of an alligator snapping turtle. So we have our sketch there. All right. We have the sketch there. This is ultimately our block, and as a reminder, since we see another question here, what is the material that you use to carve the image? Once again, we are using linoleum, and as I showed in the beginning, that we do have our through Speedball, these kind of pink blocks, as well as the Blick ready cut plates. And again, in the class that I have, we go through a little bit more in depth about those materials and kind of talking about that process. But there are a lot of options depending on what you want. So we have our alligator snapping turtle here, and then let me find where the final print is hiding. This one was really fun because when I printed it fully in black, then I got to go in after and add this piece. So this is what he ultimately looked like in the end, with a very small red tongue. For those of you who do not know, alligator snapping turtles actually like to hunker down in the bottom, kind of along the bodies, along the bottom of bodies of water, and they don't like to move a ton. But what they will do is they will open their mouth just like this, and then they have this bright pink tongue. And what that does, or this bright red tongue, that actually is going to emulate a worm. They open their mouths nice and wide. A fish thinks it's a worm, thinks it has an easy meal, and it just comes and suddenly the jaws close, and that's how they're actually catching their food. And so seeing somebody say, how long does it take to do larger pieces? It depends. Whenever I do something, when I did a piece like this, since it was predominantly the block itself was going to be the majority of what the ink was being put on, and I was only carving out smaller sections, it took, I can usually, if I don't have other things to do that day, I can do a block, I can plan a block in the morning, carve through the afternoon, and have prints by the end of the day. I can do this all within a day. If it's much more in-depth and more complicated, for example, again, kind of looking at the possum block, the possum and a poplar block, I had to remove a lot more space and a lot more details, and that tends to take a lot more time. And even with some pieces, I focus on some of the more smaller details, and that will take time. In the case of this one, I think I did a full turnaround of this one in a day. So we'll move him out of the way, but to kind of show you, like for example, there was one I did recently for October. I try to do new prints every month and kind of share something every single month. But recently the one that I did for October, let me find him in my stack of stuff, was this one. This is of an Acorn Woodpecker, and here's the matching block this way. And so this one took a lot longer because I had to carve out, this is one of those Blick ready cut plates, so you can see on the top that it's gray, and then when you carve through, it's white. And so you can see this one took a lot longer because I had to carve out all of these kind of extra spaces kind of here that way. But with this one, the reason I did this one was Acorn Woodpeckers actually use trees to store a lot of nuts and other things like that, and basically create these holes that they actually kind of stick them in. So for Halloween and for October, I did, it's called Granary Gourd is the name of this particular print. So rather than doing it in a tree, he does it in a pumpkin. All right, so we'll kind of move him here off to the side. And we have our block here, and I think I try to save the majority of my sketches for these pieces. You can see they all kind of come through in different ways. We have a lot of sketches here. I might not have the sketch for this one. Some come really detailed, like this one. And this one coming pretty detailed. Some have no detail, and I add it on the block in a little bit after. Whenever I first started printing, I usually just used drawing paper and pencil and transferred it that way. I now switched to using tracing paper for a lot of my designs and transfer it that way. So that's kind of one switch that I've done. And it's made it a little bit easier. And so you can see how that looks with sketches kind of like these ones of ultimately what we want them to look like. For this particular sketch, like I said, I like to kind of focus on some things that we might find. This one is not particularly wildlife, so this was a little bit of like an extrinsic kind of piece that ultimately turned out looking like this. And this is of apple cedar rust, which affects a variety of different plants with like cedar. It has like two hosts and it kind of alternates. It doesn't really affect the cedar, but can cause issues whenever it attaches to those in the family of Rosaceae, so it can kind of cause issues there with like apple trees and other things like that. But with this one, you can see it's actually one sketch, but in order to do this, since I had multiple colors, I actually have two blocks. And I kind of layered those blocks over one another. And let me locate those real quick. There's one. And then there's two. So you can see these are kind of the two. I used the same sketch to transfer onto both, so they match, and then just carved out different sections on each one. Since they're the same size, I lined them up in the way that I wanted. I wanted them to be kind of off kilter a little bit and mismatch there just to kind of get some of that extra funky form for this fungus. And again, every print that I do like this, especially if it's one that not as many people have heard of, I always provide a lot of information about them whenever they're shared on my website. So at the same time, people can, do I still sell these? Yes, these ones are still for sale. Or are you asking if they are rare or if they're odd enough that they don't sell? So a lot of prints that I make, they are designed for people who are really interested in wildlife. So the majority of people who buy prints like these or like mine are people that do work in forestry and do work in wildlife or other things like that. I like to joke that I am kind of my own target audience. I never pick subjects based on what I think will sell or what I think won't. I pick my subjects and what I want to do based off, it's more interest driven than anything, because, and I'm not sure if other people feel this way, however you choose your subjects is completely up to you. If people give you a lot of requests and you create them that way, the only way art remains fun for me, which is the entire reason that I do it, is that it has to be something that I am interested in. So sometimes I will kind of take requests if people have ideas about what they might like to see, but ultimately if it's not something that doesn't resonate with me and that I don't get excited about, then I don't do it. So even if they never sell, this one I actually 100% created because I wanted it. But then when you already have the blocks, or I printed like a few of them and sold a few of them, but this one I created for myself. Because I really wanted one. But so that's kind of how I come through with a lot of my artists. One, creating pieces that reflect a lot of wildlife, and two, it's something that I'm interested in. It isn't necessarily trying to pick species or pick examples of animals that I think other people, or that I'm guessing other people will want. They're ones that I find interesting. That's the only way that this is something that I've been able to make sustainable for myself and continuing to create, is it has to be kind of interest driven that way. Otherwise, it becomes a little more uncomfortable for me and I don't nearly enjoy it, and that's obviously not what I want when I use this as kind of a way to express myself and my interests and things like that. But you can see you have some of these prints here. And so you've kind of seen throughout this process how we can kind of go from some of our sketches, for example, an alligator gar, like this. When we talk about like interest driven, I created this print after listening to a full podcast about alligator gars. And I just thought they were so cool, kind of hearing about them and hearing about their background as people thinking that they're trash fish. And so we have the alligator gar here. This is ultimately how the block turned out. And then the print itself looks like this. And so you can kind of see, this one's nice because it fits all right here. And so you can kind of see here with these blocks. And I see the question of, can you tell us something about how we should choose our subjects to get to the point where what they will do is something that people will want? I unfortunately cannot predict that for you. I really can't. And guessing that has never been really a part of how I go through my personal creative process. So unfortunately, that's not something I can really offer help. You can always, if you have an audience that you're hoping for, you can always ask and say, you know, is there a subject that you wish that you got to see? You can ask them that way. But unfortunately, I do not do very well with kind of guessing that. And like I said, that's not usually how I go through my process that way, so I can't really help you with that one. But it depends on if you already have an audience. But my advice is to always pick something that you feel excited about. Make it art that you wish that you could have in your own home. That's how I go about mine. If it's not something I would want in my own home, I don't usually create it. All of these pieces stay with me. All the blocks stay with me. I have, you know, art throughout my own house. Yeah, like I said, I usually am my own target audience and what I want to create, and that's how I'm able to kind of make it fun. So what we're going to do now, I am going to get ready to kind of switch back here briefly. We're going to switch our camera back to kind of wrap up any kind of final questions or anything else that someone else might have. So we're back over here. So this is where we'll kind of take an opportunity to see if we have any other questions, any concerns. And so we say, sorry to ask another question, but you teach all different textures. I do not know what we mean by textures. Again, I am a 100% kind of self-taught artist, so I will be honest when I say that different terminology, I will probably have no clue what it means because I never really took art classes up until maybe even when I was an adult. And a lot of what I've done is kind of through trial and error. So if you could explain a little bit more what you mean by textures, that would be helpful. Hopefully I can answer. Let's see if we have any other. For the paper, so I see someone asking about paper. I use different types depending on what we're doing. So I buy, for the final prints that I ultimately do, I buy I think it's either Ribs or Reeves. I'm not 100% sure how you pronounce it out loud. It looks like you can kind of see, maybe you can kind of see oh, wait, there it was. Right like that. So that is kind of the impression that gets left on the paper. But I buy larger sheets like this. They have different shades of white. They have different thicknesses that you can buy, and it's going to be up to your preference. Oh, on the gar, I see different shapes in the tail and the scales. Yes, we do kind of talk about when we're doing different scales in my class, when we talk about, especially with snakes and with the turtle that we do, we'll talk a little bit more about that in the class and how creating some of those textures kinds of works that way and how we're able to kind of implement that. In the case of the gar, that was actually easier than other ones, as it literally is squares and then smaller marks within those squares. So you can kind of see how that was created. Was an easier way to kind of create that texture there that way. All right, so again, all of this information, I go through all of it a lot more in depth kind of in my class there about what materials we talk through, everything, possibly a little too much, making sure we're all on the same page that way. And yeah, so here you'll be able to, again, if you are interested in the class, it comes out on Monday, you can go ahead and you can purchase it now. There is that 20% off code. Once again, to make sure I say it correctly, I believe it is Block Wild for 20% off. We'll find it. Yep, Block Wild, so B-L-O-C-K Wild, W-I-L-D. That's going to get you 20% off, but it expires Friday, so it expires tomorrow. So if you want to use it, you have to make sure that you use it either today or tomorrow so it doesn't leave. Thank you all so much for taking some time, spending some time with me, kind of talking through this process, giving me the opportunity to kind of share with you some of my sketches, some of my other artwork, and my blocks. Getting to talk through why I choose some of the subjects that I choose. And hopefully, even if you don't want to participate in my class, that's totally fine. But hopefully you will go after this class and maybe look at some of the wildlife around you and some of the natural world a little bit differently, and maybe start looking for a little bit of your inspiration kind of around you, and hopefully helping you create pieces kind of like mine, looking for unconventional subjects, maybe ones that you don't always hear. So if you sign up, I am very excited, and I hope that you really enjoy the class. Thank you all so much for having me today, and I hope that you have a great rest of your Thursday, or a great rest of your day, okay? All right, thank you.